Good day, everyone. Budget freezes are just a reality, and HR is often one of the first to be impacted. But cutting HR programs doesn't actually save you any money. It actually costs you greatly in retention. Today, I'll show you exactly how to stop that turnover spiral when budgets are locked or frozen. Good day, everyone. I'm Christina Green, generational translator in the workplace, and this is the Generational Edge podcast. Let's get started. Listen, we all know the direct costs of turnover, right? The impact that it has on talent acquisition, on recruiting, on hiring. The onboarding process can be incredibly lengthy. But the indirect costs actually don't get captured in a line item and often can be the most impactful. Like for example, when employees leave, they take their valuable expertise and their relationships with them. The morale drops on your team and disengagement starts to spread like a forest fire. Projects start to stall because we can't execute as frequently or as according to timelines. Deadlines are starting to slip, and suddenly you've lost control over some of your most important initiatives. Productivity is definitely taking a hit because people are feeling the brunt of the new work that's being transferred over to them from others. There is a shift from desk to desk as opposed to a reprioritization or recalibration over what is actually important. Your reputation is taking a hit because, and it's harder to attract new talent because of this. And your culture is being fractured because the people who are left behind are feeling survivor's guilt and their trust in leadership is starting to erode. Now, a lot of this is due to the lack of transparency, visibility, and when there's questions and no answers, people start to feel unsafe. Now, while the budget line items may save you a buck or a couple $100,000, it's the indirect costs that are actually quietly going to drain your business, drain your productivity, and ultimately kill your reputation. Now, we see this impact on each generation very differently. Boomers are feeling pushed out before they're ready, especially if we're talking about layoffs, especially if we're talking about restructuring, reorganizations. Gen X is silently burning out and carrying that extra load, right? We know that Gen X tends to be very resilient, but they also too tend to be very quiet about when they're reaching burnout. So you have to be careful about how you're managing them through this process as well. Zennials are stuck in the middle. They're feeling completely overlooked and underappreciated. And if you don't know what a Zennial is, talk about an invisible generation, right? 25 million people essentially who are completely lost in the shuffle. Millennials will start to disengage when growth is starting to grow. They they start to pull back because they're not sure of what that career path or what now their career trajectory looks like. And Gen X is absolutely going to ghost you because if that future is unclear, then there's no transparency. They do not know where you're going, and they're not going to be on a boat that's going nowhere. When you add this all up, these cracks can split your culture completely open. Everything starts and ends with trust. And most leaders miss this because retention isn't about money. We always think that it is. We think that people are only going to stay because of their pay, because of their compensation, because of the benefit package. When it's all said and done, people actually need to feel trust. They need to feel safe, trust in their leaders, and safe in to hide the truth, especially during budget freezes. You've got to be transparent or clear about what it is, about why there is a freeze, right? There are some companies that have freezes on an annual basis, right? When you enter a certain season, they have a hiring freeze for business reasons. Be transparent about what that looks like. Now, I'm not talking about being transparent down to every skin and bone. I'm not talking about oversharing, but rather about giving people the context so they can act on it. Something like promotions are paused this quarter, but here is the criteria we will be using once they resume, right? That provides clarity into the why and sets expectations for the future. This most people can get behind. Another one is we're shifting into an investment into staff retention over some of the perks that we've been providing, because keeping you here is what matters most, right? And we know that there are studies that are showing that people aren't necessarily many programs that are offered as benefits for within their organizations, and that's okay, right? But they're no longer seeing that as the reason to stay. So some of those perks are starting to fall off for the purpose of trying to put together other initiatives, other programs that are going to invite them and make them feel more bought into your culture, into your organization. The reprioritization or shifting of those budget dollars into more meaningful programs, if you're open and honest about why you're doing that and what that looks like, then your team knows what you're doing, right? They can make decisions based on that. Another one, here's what we know. Here's what is still undecided. And here's when you'll hear from us again. This is really important when you're managing any type of major change throughout an organization, right? Being clear about something that is very visible to your staff and helping them to understand that this is not fully right. Maybe it's an acquisition. Maybe they're being acquired by another company, as an example. Leading them through it by helping them to understand this is where we are today, and this is where we're going to be navigating towards. Here is how we're going to communicate with you. Here's how you're going to know and when we have more updates, right? It's not giving the details of everything, but it's keeping them on a need to know basis for details that are important to them, that impact them. This helps to build trust. This clarity and this is honest. And while they may not love it, they'll respect it, and ultimately they will come to trust it and trust in your leadership. But this is why the transparency is actually your hidden weapon. When you explain the why behind the decisions, people can get bought into that. They can make decisions for themselves, right? Instead of you making decisions for them, they can understand whether or not your decision process or your decisions are aligning with their values. You can provide them with context for how those decisions are being made. That helps them to be bought into you more as a leader and helping them to feel more grounded in the decisions that are forthcoming as well. And you can set those expectations clearly, right? Both on yourself as well as what you're expecting from your organization, from your staff, from your workforce. You want them to be knowledgeable and clear about the journey that they are on with you. When you do this, you remove the guesswork that typically destroys trust, because when we hide many of these details and we feel that we can't disclose them, but when we hide them, then we start to feel secret, right? And if people don't get, and typically it will be a whole lot worse than in reality. Transparency costs nothing, but it pays in dividends across every generation. So let's look at what that looks like. So starting with the baby boomers, they want to know that leadership has a steady hand on the wheel. They value strength in leadership, confidence in their leadership. They have to feel that the leaders that they are following are capable of supporting them throughout much of that change. They want to know when transparency are being dismissed, or that the company's direction is unsure or uncertain. They value loyalty. You'll find that baby boomers have been with companies in roles for much longer than some of the other generations, and that's simply because it's inherent or foundational to their values, right? They believe in doing a good job, standing by an organization that has been loyal to them, right? And being loyal in return. But when leaders share openly, when they are transparent, for example, when they say we're cutting conference travel this year to protect jobs, being forthcoming, that is helping your employees, your workforce to understand how decisions are being made and why, right? It's not just saying no more conference travel this year. Boomers see this as steady and thought information, but you're making decisions that are sound and aligned with their values. Transparency helps them to stay committed because it reassures them that the company is not operating out of chaos and they're not being reactive and responding to the environment rather than being more planful. Now, Gen X is independent and pragmatic and known for carrying the weight in silence, right? We carry the burden of taking on the extra work. I'll do it myself, right? The resilience of the most resilient generation, if you will, or known for across all of the generations. But they crave that clarity because hidden information just adds to their burnout, right? They have no idea what that journey is going to look like, and yet they will allow themselves to be drugged along that journey, but unwillingly, right? You will not have their full buy-in. Your Gen X leaders are the ones who you need to be able to help usher in their teams, help them to hold those teams together. In many ways, they are the glue. And if you are hiding information from them, not making them part of the decisions, they're going to be resentful. And if we think quiet quitting is something that is happening with millennials and Gen Z alone, absolutely not. Gen X is silently feeling burnt out, and while they may not actually quit, they may with them each day, and it will impact their work and their quality of the work that they or quality of life that they're experiencing within your environment. Transparency gives Gen X the tools to plan. That is what they need. They need to be able to understand and anticipate what that future looks like, even if it's not one that they truly desire. Give them the opportunity to make those decisions themselves. They'll find a way to make it work if you're clear about what the priorities are and how they fit into that prioritization. But if you're vague, they will assume the worst and they will absolutely quietly disengage. Now, think about telling them, here's the project we're pausing so we can deliver on the one that matters the most. Having been part of large initiatives throughout my career, having this redirection, reprioritization from a leadership position is very impactful because instead of doing 20 things very mediocre or terribly, you can focus on maybe the 5 or 10 that actually are very important and you can excel at them better, right? Gen X across across any workforce in any generation wants to do a good job. But if we're not giving them the tools by giving them the whole picture, we're hiding things from them, they feel like they cannot be successful. The level of honesty and respects their pragmatism and helps them to conserve energy for what truly counts instead of wasting their energy in other ways. All right, now let's get into Zennials. Zennials are this 25 million population that is, if you will, sandwiched between Gen X and millennials. If you didn't know, they are about a 7-year period of a spike in births where other generations were more about 65, 62 million in births. Zennials were about 25 million, right? And they straddle the tail end and the very beginning of the millennials. So the end of Gen X to the millennials. And so naturally, and I'm a Zennial, they are squeezed between these two generations, and they often feel like they are overlooked. And that invisibility absolutely breeds frustration because they feel unseen, they feel undervalued, and definitely overworked because they take on much of the values or attributes of Gen X, where they're very hardworking and resilient and will typically not say a lot, when they are feeling undervalued. And they also too are looking to excel in their career, and they continue to butt up to many of those challenges along their career. Transparency is about inclusion, and they want to know that their voices matter and that they aren't forgotten, especially in the decision making process. So, when leaders explain the why and invite them into the conversation, it signals to them that we see you, we value you, and we're not leaving you out. We know that you count. And I'm not talking about singling out generations. I'm talking about speaking into the listening of your team, of your workforce. How do you lean in this way? Because this is not costing anything to be intentional, to be an intentional leader, and how it is that you are leading and guiding your team through these uncertain times. This is what keeps Xennials engaged instead of stuck in that middle with no view or no understanding of the path forward. All right, now let's get into millennials. Millennials are the generation of fairness and growth. As you've heard me say before, they are the highest achieving academically, right? And therefore have the largest amount of student loans because of it, right? They carry all of the acronyms, all of the accolades. They have achieved greatly, masters, PhDs, doctorates, right? And multiples of these things, right? They've lived through layoffs and broken promises and stalled advancement. Boomers and Gen X also too have experienced many of these things, but at this point in their career, millennials have experienced this earlier on in their career than some of the other generations. So when promotions or pay increases slow down, they're really quick to disengage because unless you're transparent, because let's get it clear, millennials are looking to achieve, they're looking for the accolades, they're looking for the titles. They want those positions because they feel that they have earned them, certainly with all of the credentials that they have collected up to that point. So it's one thing understanding another. So this is why you're seeing a lot of positions are requiring more advanced degrees, because many of them are moving into these leadership or decision-making positions and making decisions about what the qualifications are for many of those roles. Transparency to millennials means that criteria and visible pathways are understood, even if advancement is delayed. They can accept a delay in their career if they understand what the criteria is going to be in order to meet it once they are lifted, right? So, how do I become a director, a VP, a leader in this organization? They're very bought into understanding what that path looks like at the point of hiring. Help them to understand what their career journey could look like in support of their goals. This helps them to make uh, value-based alignment decisions on whether or not they want to stay. You don't have to gaslight them into staying. Be transparent. And by being transparent with them, you share the steps, and when the door, excuse me, share the steps, and when the door will open again, they will trust that process because you were transparent from the beginning. But if you're vague, they're going to assume favoritism, right? That, oh, this is about nepotism. This is about who you like, who's in your corner, who's part of your circle. And they'll see these as broken promises. Transparency is the difference between keeping them hopeful versus losing them to your competitor, right? They will take that valuable expertise and knowledge and those relationships and move them over to your competitor. All right. Now, Gen Z, I will say the highly misunderstood generation um, of all. Everyone thinks that they are entitled, but they, in fact, actually have just been keeping really good notes on Gen X experience in the corporate environment. They are the authenticity seekers, and I will say the the BS callers. They sniff it out very quickly. This group has grown up with the receipts, the screenshots, and the fact check you in a heartbeat. over anything. And you've got to be transparent with them because transparency equals authenticity to them. Don't lie to them. They can smell smoke and they have no interest in being part of that experiment. They want leaders who are upfront and honest with them, even when the news is not good. They don't necessarily need to know that everything is going great and then get gaslit on the back end when things are crumbling. So, a message such as, we're pausing raises, but here's how we're investing in your development instead. This lands far better than silence or you trying to spin, right? Transparency proves to Gen Z that leadership isn't trying to hide anything. And that's what's important. They show up exactly how they are, and they're looking for you to do the same. Now, not every generation is the same. Not every generation has learned or felt psychologically safe, if you will, in the work environment. And so they haven't necessarily allowed themselves, their full authentic selves, to show up in the workplace. And so this is very new. Gen Z bringing that authenticity into the workplace is what's causing a lot of this friction. And we'll have other conversations about this because this is not necessarily a them problem, but more of an evolution in the workplace that is actively taking place that we can't fight. This is called progress. So authenticity builds the loyalty that keeps them from ghosting you. No matter the generation, transparency is the deal breaker, absolutely for Gen Z. They are not going to, they will prioritize that authenticity and that honesty over everything. But you can't cut your way to retention. And let's talk about why transparency is actually the smarter spend. We know the direct costs add up fast, right? We can calculate them. They are several line items on a budget, but the indirect costs will absolutely drain your budget like a leaky faucet. Every dollar counts and matters, especially during a freeze. So transparent communication doesn't cost anymore. It actually just requires higher EQ, right? Us leaning into and understanding and speaking with our teams. But it prevents the leaky faucet from turning into a flood simply by keeping people engaged. You know the saying that if you don't make time for your wellness, you'll be forced to make time for your illness? Well, the same is true for retention through trust. If we're not leaning into building our trust and leaning into trying to actively retain our staff, then we're going to have to make time or be forced to make time and to find budget dollars to replace them, right? And how do you replace someone who has decades of experience, who has irreplaceable knowledge or historical knowledge of your business and operations and the journey of how you landed where you are, or has the strategy and innovation for where it is that you're going or could in the future? That's irreplaceable. Transparency is the cheapest and the fastest lever to pull when it comes to protecting your ROI. Now, when budgets tighten, your culture is, excuse me, when budgets are tight, your culture is at its most fragile. Transparency is your protection. It is your armor against these things. And without it, you don't just risk losing people or good people, great talent. You risk losing the glue that's actually holding people together, holding teams together, right? Most companies, especially younger companies, are in some way flying blind, right? Or building the airplane as you're flying it. Lots of band-aids and bubble gum and paper clips are holding things together. And that's okay because that's part of the growth process. But when you are not proactive in recognizing all of the pieces that are in fact actually holding all of those people together, they are people. They are not necessarily systems, they are not applications. They are the people and the relationships that are the strength and the greatest asset within your organization. Now let me ask you, What's the one cut that you're dreading this budget season, right? We understand that transparency protects culture when money is tight, but and not just when money is tight, but I wanna know, what is something that you are actually struggling with or you're dreading going through this budget season, knowing that you're likely either going to have to fight your pants off in order to justify each budget line item, but what is one thing that is really bothering you? I'd love to see it. Put it in the chat because I'm gonna respond to these. I want to understand what challenges are you facing today that and how you might be able to lean in without it necessarily costing more, right? Retention is one way. Transparency is one way to approach many of these challenges around budget season. All right. Now, are you ready to stop the turnover spiral? Here is how I help leaders just like you to break the burnout, to perform, to reward cycle, to build cultures where people feel safe and not just visible, to equip your leaders to have authentic and unforced conversations, and uncover the generational blind spots that quietly drive disengagement. And trust me, we all have these, right? This is not something that people are actively aware of. Oh, they are a millennial, so I feel this way about them. That's not anything that anyone carries with them, or at least not in their frontal lobe. These things are buried in our subconscious, right? They're part of the value alignment, and we look for these commonalities with other people, and oftentimes we find them in with generations that are similar to ours, right? That's how you keep people even when the budgets are frozen, right? Is by leaning into many of these intentional activities. So if you're ready to have a conversation about what generational dynamics looks like and awareness on your team, then use the QR code on the screen and let's have a conversation about how leaning in with your multi-generational team can save you costly staff replacement costs. We all know that it can cost up to 20%, right? Up to 20% of the cost of your employee, of cost of that position to actually replace them. All right. Well, that's my time today. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'm Christina Green, your generational translator in the workforce, and helping you to lead people and not just payrolls. So stay transparent, stay trusted. I'll see you next time. Take care.